Have you ever stood on the edge of something you've dreamed of, only to freeze? Your hands tremble, your breath catches. The voice inside says, "What if I fall?" This is the story of a mountaineer, a man who trained his whole life to conquer one final peak. He had the skill, the strength, the map memorized down to every ridge and crack. But when the moment came, the mountain stared back, silent and merciless. And fear, more than the cold, wrapped its hands around his heart. He thought failure meant falling, that slipping meant shame. But the truth he would discover high among the clouds would change everything. Because this story isn't just about climbing a mountain. It's about what happens when we fall and rise again. It holds a simple truth that can change the way you see your own struggles. Falling is not the end of the climb. It's part of it. The climb began before dawn. The air was thin, the kind that makes silence feel heavier. Each step echoed in the hollow space between earth and sky. The mountaineer moved carefully, counting breaths like prayers, his gloved hand tracing the icy rope that tethered him to hope. He had trained for years for this ascent. Every muscle remembered the rhythm. One foot, then the other, then the next breath. Yet something unseen pressed against him that morning, a quiet unease that crept beneath his ribs. Halfway up, the wind turned violent. The mountain roared like it was alive. Snow swirled into his eyes, stinging, blinding. He dug his axe into the ice, gasping. Beneath him stretched a drop so deep it looked endless. Above him, clouds devoured the summit. For the first time in years, he felt small. He tried to steady himself. "It's just fear," he whispered. But fear didn't listen. It whispered back louder. "What if you can't do it? What if this is where it ends?" He had faced storms before, but this was different. This wasn't nature against him. It was himself. The same voice that once pushed him upward was now the one holding him back. He looked down and saw the faint trail he had left behind, tiny footprints disappearing under fresh snow. He thought of all the people who believed in him, the ones who said, "You always make it to the top." And that's what broke him. Not the wind, not the mountain, but the quiet shame of thinking he might disappoint them. He pressed forward anyway, driven by something brittle, pride maybe, or fear of appearing weak. But the higher he climbed, the more his confidence fractured. His gloves slipped on the rope. His boot missed a ledge. For a heartbeat, he dangled between sky and stone. The sound that escaped his throat wasn't a scream. It was surrender. He swung hard, slammed against the cliffside, his breath knocked out, heart pounding. Snow rushed past like ghosts. When he finally steadied himself, his chest burned. His knees trembled. He realized he wasn't climbing anymore. He was just trying not to fall. The peak disappeared behind fog, unreachable. The only thing he could see clearly was the truth he'd been avoiding all along. He wasn't afraid of the mountain. He was afraid of failing in front of himself. And in that moment, hanging there between ambition and fear, he asked the question no one else could answer for him. If I fall, who will I become? He spent that night in a narrow crevice, wedged between two slabs of stone, his body aching and his pride colder than the air. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was worse. Snow fell softly outside, each flake dissolving on the edges of his gloves. He could have turned back. No one would have blamed him, but something in him refused to move. Not forward, not down. Just still, as if he was waiting for the mountain to speak. At dawn, a faint sound echoed through the white. Footsteps. He looked up and saw a figure emerging from the fog. An old climber, face lined like a map of every failure he'd survived. His coat was patched, his eyes steady. He carried no rope, no modern gear, just an ice axe worn smooth by years of use. The mountaineer called out, How did you get up here? The old man smiled faintly. By falling, many times. The mountaineer frowned. You mean you've failed this climb too? Failed? The old man's voice was low, nearly lost in the wind. No. I learned the mountain's rhythm. It throws you down to teach you where to place your feet. He sat beside him, pulling a small kettle from his pack. The thin steam rose like prayer smoke. The mistake most climbers make, he continued, is thinking the fall is punishment, but it's part of the climb. You can't learn balance without losing it first. The mountaineer stared at him, half in awe, half in disbelief. That's easy to say when you've already made it. The old man chuckled softly. Made it? Son, I've never reached the top. I just keep climbing better. For a long moment they sat in silence, watching the sun paint gold across the snow. The wind had softened. Even the mountains seemed to listen. Finally, the old man handed him a small length of frayed rope. This was my first, he said. It broke once, and I kept it as a reminder. A reminder of what? The old man looked toward the horizon. That falling doesn't mean failing, unless you stop getting up. He placed the rope in the mountaineer's gloved hand and stood. You'll know what to do when the mountain tests you again. Then, as quietly as he had appeared, the old climber walked into the mist, disappearing like memory. The mountaineer turned the rope over in his palm, feeling the roughness where it had once snapped. Something in him stirred. Not confidence, not yet, but a calm understanding. For the first time, he didn't fear the fall. He simply prepared for the next step. The morning broke clear. No storm, no roar, just light spilling across the peaks like forgiveness. The mountaineer rose slowly, every muscle protesting, but his mind felt still. He tied the frayed rope around his wrist, the old man's words echoing softly. Falling doesn't mean failing, unless you stop getting up. This time, he climbed differently, not faster, not harder, just with presence. Each foothold was a conversation, each pull a lesson. The wind still howled, the ice still broke beneath him, but the fear no longer ruled. When he slipped, and he did, he caught himself, smiled faintly, and kept going. He began to understand what the old climber meant by rhythm. The mountain wasn't against him, it was teaching him. Every misstep, every bruise, every trembling pause was its way of saying, listen. Hours passed. He reached a ridge that had defeated him before. The path was narrow, almost mocking. He pressed his hand against the rock, feeling its cold pulse. Then, instead of charging forward, he paused, breathed, and moved with the mountain, not against it. And something extraordinary happened. The path that once felt impossible revealed its quiet order. The same stones that had once betrayed him now carried his weight. When he finally reached the summit, there was no triumphant shout, no victory pose. He simply stood, breathing thin air, watching clouds drift beneath his feet. He realized then, the climb had never been about conquering the mountain. It was about learning to trust himself when the ground gave way. And for the first time, he didn't look down with fear. He looked down with grace. What the mountaineer discovered on that mountain wasn't courage. It was humility. He learned that the greatest danger in any climb, whether a mountain, a dream, or a life, isn't the fall itself. It's the belief that falling means you're not worthy of the summit. We live in a world obsessed with reaching the top. Our culture celebrates victory, perfection, the spotless highlight reel. But what it rarely shows are the pauses, the bruises, the quiet nights when we almost give up. Yet that's where growth happens. The mountaineer's moment of clarity, that falling is part of the climb, carries a truth that applies far beyond the mountains. In career, it means mistakes aren't the end of your story. They're the evidence that you're in motion. Every project that fails, every idea that collapses, is sharpening your instinct for what works next. In relationships, it means the cracks between two people don't always signal the end. Sometimes they're the start of deeper understanding, if we dare to rebuild with honesty. And in self-doubt, it means your lowest point might not be a failure at all. It might be the lesson that teaches you how to rise without fear. Failure, in truth, is feedback. The universe doesn't use success as its teacher. It uses friction. The fall humbles you, slows you down, and makes you listen to what your pride tried to silence. But here's the paradox. Once you stop fearing failure, it loses its power. Because fear only feeds on resistance. The moment you see falling as part of the rhythm, not a break in it, the rhythm returns. The old climber's rope, frayed, imperfect, is a mirror for the life we all live. Every broken thread is a story of survival, not shame. You too have your own frayed rope. Maybe it's the memory of something that didn't work out, a dream you set aside, a version of yourself you think you failed. But those are not scars, they're instructions. Think of the moments when you tried and stumbled. Did the world end? No, it simply changed shape around you, waiting for you to move again. Falling doesn't destroy momentum. Stopping does. Because every fall, physical, emotional, spiritual, carries within it the coordinates for your next ascent. So when fear visits you again, when your hand trembles before the next risk, the next truth, the next leap, remember this. You're not weak for feeling afraid. You are human for acknowledging it. Courage doesn't mean you stop fearing the fall. It means you climb anyway. The mountaineer didn't find peace by conquering the peak. He found peace by accepting that every summit is temporary, every step sacred, and every fall necessary. That's the rhythm of mastery. Effort, stumble, recalibrate, rise. And it's in that rhythm, not in perfection, where meaning lives. If you're struggling now, at work, in love, or in silence with yourself, remember, your mountain is not mocking you. It's teaching you how to climb it. There's a moment, right before you move again, when the world holds its breath for you. That pause is your grace. That's where the climb begins again, not from strength, but from surrender. So ask yourself tonight, where are you still afraid to fall? And what might happen if, instead of resisting it, you simply let yourself trust the rope, trust the lesson, trust the rhythm? So here's the question only you can answer. What mountain are you afraid to climb? And what would happen if you stopped fearing the fall? Because life will keep placing you at the edge of dreams, of change, of truth. And each time, the wind will whisper the same warning. What if you fail? When it does, remember the mountaineer. Remember the frayed rope in his hand, the one that once broke, but now reminds him how far he's come. Your journey doesn't need to look perfect. It only needs to be honest. Step by step, breath by breath. One lesson, one fall, one rise at a time. Tonight, write down the thing you've been avoiding, the project, the conversation, the leap, and take one small action toward it tomorrow. Don't wait for the fear to vanish. Move with it. And when you do, you'll find that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the quiet decision to climb anyway. If this story moved something in you, like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere, someone else needs to hear. The fall is not the end. It's where you begin again.